I'm Jordan, 28, female. I live in a small but cozy apartment above the veterinary clinic where I work, a place filled with the comforting sounds of healing animals. For the past decade, my life has been a blur of textbooks, late night study sessions, and the single-minded pursuit of becoming a vet. It was supposed to be the culmination of a family dream, the moment I finally made my parents proud, but I soon discovered that the dream they had for me was a nightmare in disguise. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The day of my graduation party was bathed in perfect golden sunlight. My parents, David and Susan Miller, had spared no expense. Our sprawling suburban home, a testament to my father's success as a real estate developer, was decorated with balloons in my university colors. A catering staff bustled around a pristine white marquee set up on the manicured lawn. My mother, an interior designer with a flair for the dramatic, floated through the crowd, accepting congratulations on my behalf, as if she were the one who had spent the last 8 years buried in anatomy and pharmacology textbooks. "Isn't she wonderful?" she'd say, clasping the arm of some distant relative. "Our brilliant Dr. Jordan. All that hard work finally paid off." I smiled until my cheeks ached, playing the part of the grateful daughter. My father, a man who measured worth in square footage and profit margins, clapped me on the back a little too hard. "That's my girl," he boomed, his voice carrying across the lawn. "The best investment we ever made." That word, investment, should have been my first clue. To them, I wasn't a daughter. I was a stock they had poured money into, now expecting a significant return. The party was less a celebration of my achievement and more a showcase of their success in raising a high-value asset. My younger brother, Leo, slouched near the drink table, looking bored. At 24, he was still a college student, perpetually switching majors and living comfortably on our parents' dime. He was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong, while I was the one who had to constantly prove my worth. He caught my eye and gave me a lazy, unimpressed smirk before turning his attention back to his phone. The entire event felt like a carefully staged play. Friends of my parents, people I hadn't seen in years, approached me with wide, artificial smiles. They'd ask about my plans, my student loans, always circling back to the financial aspect. David and Susan must be so relieved. One of my mother's friends whispered conspiratorially, "All that tuition, but a veterinarian, such a respectable, stable career. You'll be able to pay them back in no time. Pay them back." I frowned, confused. My parents had always presented their support as a gift, a foundation for my future. I had worked part-time jobs and taken on some loans myself to ease the burden, but the bulk of it was covered by a college fund they had spoken of since I was a child. The idea of repayment had never been mentioned. I brushed it off as a misunderstanding, a clumsy comment from someone who didn't know our family dynamics. My best friend and fellow vet, Sarah Chen, found me by the flower arrangements, a knowing look in her eyes. "You holding up okay?" she asked, handing me a glass of sparkling water. "This is a lot. It's my parents' victory lap, not my party." I murmured, trying to keep the bitterness out of my voice. "Did you hear, Mrs. Gable?" She asked about my repayment plan. Sarah's expression tightened. "That's weird. They're acting like they are your lenders, not your parents." The thought was unsettling, a tiny crack in the perfect facade of the day, but I pushed it down. This was my graduation day. A day for celebration. I had my degree, a great job lined up at a clinic run by a wonderful senior vet, and my whole future ahead of me. I wouldn't let a few strange comments or my family's suffocating pride ruin it. As the sun began to set, my father called for everyone's attention. He stood on the patio, my mother at his side, both of them beaming. He raised his champagne flute for a toast. To Jordan, he began, his voice thick with emotion that I now realize was entirely fake. "Who has finally finished her education and is ready to start contributing. We are so proud of the asset she has become." The crowd cheered. I smiled, feeling a cold knot forming in my stomach. The word asset again. It hung in the air, ugly and transactional. My mother came towards me then, her own glass in hand, her smile a little too bright, a little too sharp at the edges. She handed me a flute of champagne, different from the ones the waiters were serving. "A special toast, darling," she said softly, her eyes glinting in the twilight. "Just for you, from us." I took the glass, my mind still stuck on my father's words. I was their daughter, not their property. But as I looked at their smiling faces, surrounded by the opulent display they had orchestrated, a deep, chilling realization began to dawn. This wasn't a celebration. It was a transaction, and the final payment was about to be made. I held the special glass of champagne my mother had given me. It looked identical to the others, a cascade of golden bubbles rising to the surface. But her insistence, the way she had pressed it into my hand, felt strange. "Drink up, sweetheart," my father urged, joining her at my side. "You deserve it." Their faces were a study in parental pride, a mask so perfectly crafted that anyone else would have been moved. But I had seen glimpses behind that mask my whole life. The flicker of annoyance when I chose a less prestigious university for its veterinary program. The tight-lipped silence when I spent a summer volunteering at an animal shelter instead of interning at my father's firm. Their love had always been conditional, tied to a very specific image of success. Leo sauntered over, a smirk playing on his lips, finally joining the real world. "Sis, about time you started pulling your weight." His words, meant to be a playful jab, landed like stones. Before I could respond, my mother cut in, her voice smooth as silk. Now, Leo, your sister has made us very proud. Drink, Jordan, a toast to your future." I felt cornered, the eyes of all their friends and business associates on me. To refuse would be to create a scene, to shatter the perfect image they had so carefully constructed. So I raised the glass to the future. I echoed, my voice sounding hollow to my own ears. I took a small, hesitant sip. The champagne was cold, crisp, and off. There was a subtle, almost imperceptible bitterness at the back of my throat, a metallic tang that was immediately masked by the sweetness of the drink. I paused, frowning. It could have been anything. A residue on the glass, a bottle that was slightly turned. I was about to take another sip when Sarah appeared at my elbow, looking panicked. "Jordan, there's an emergency call from the clinic," she said, her voice low and urgent. "Mrs. Henderson's golden retriever, buddy. He's having a seizure. Marcus is out of town, and you're the only one nearby who knows his history." Relief washed over me, a perfect excuse to escape. "I have to go," I said, setting the nearly full glass down on a nearby table. My mother's smile faltered. "Now, Jordan, it's your party." "An animal is sick, Mom. This is my job now," I replied, the words tasting like freedom. My father's expression darkened. "This is unprofessional. You're embarrassing us." "A dog is dying," I shot back, my voice firmer than I intended. "That's more important than this party." Without another word, I followed Sarah, grabbing my keys and my vet bag from the house. As we hurried to her car, I saw my parents whispering furiously to each other, their faces contorted with anger. My mother's eyes locked on the glass of champagne I had left on the table. For a split second, I saw not disappointment, but a flash of pure, unadulterated rage. It was so intense it made me shiver. The crisis at the clinic was real. Buddy was in bad shape, and it took nearly 2 hours of focused, intense work to stabilize him. By the time his breathing was even, and his owner was weeping with gratitude, the adrenaline had completely worn off, replaced by a deep, aching exhaustion. My party was the last thing on my mind. Sarah drove me back home. The marquee was gone, and the last of the catering vans was pulling away. My parents' cars were in the driveway. I walked in through the back door, expecting a lecture. Instead, the house was silent. I found my parents and Leo in the living room, sitting in stony silence. My mother looked up, her face pale. "You're back. Is something wrong?" I asked, confused by the tense atmosphere. My father stood up, his face a mask of cold fury. "Something is wrong. You abandoned your own party. You humiliated us in front of our friends and my business partners. After everything we've done for you, everything we've spent. I had an emergency," I said, my voice rising. "It was my first official night on call. What did you expect me to do? We expect you to understand your obligations," he roared. "The money for your education wasn't a gift, Jordan. It was a loan, a family loan, but a loan nonetheless. We have a contract drawn up. You were supposed to sign it tonight after the party, a repayment schedule, 25% of your pre-tax income for the next 30 years. I stared at him, my mind reeling. I felt the floor drop out from under me. "What? You never said a word about this. Not once." "We funded your dream," my mother said, her voice dripping with venom. "Did you really think it was free? You've been a leech on this family for 28 years. It's time you started paying your own way and paying us back. Your brother understands family duty." Leo looked away, refusing to meet my eyes. He knew he had known all along. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The comments from the guests, my father's talk of investments and assets. It was all planned. The party was a public declaration of my indebtedness to them. But there was still one piece that didn't fit: the bitter champagne, the flash of rage on my mother's face when I left it behind. It was a small, nagging detail, but in the context of their monumental betrayal, it felt sinister. "The champagne," I said suddenly, my voice barely a whisper, "the special glass you gave me." My mother's face went blank. "What about it? It tasted strange," I said, watching her carefully. My father scoffed. "Don't be ridiculous. You're just trying to change the subject. We're talking about your debt." But I saw it, a flicker of panic in my mother's eyes before she smoothed it over, a shared, guilty glance between her and my father. They weren't just trying to trap me in debt. There was something else, something much, much darker, and I had a terrifying, sick feeling that walking out of that party hadn't just saved me from a lecture, it had saved my life. The next morning, I woke up with a headache that had nothing to do with alcohol and everything to do with the emotional sledgehammer my family had taken to my life. The words leech, investment, and 30 years echoed in my head. I felt sick, hollowed out. I went to the clinic early, needing the quiet routine and the uncomplicated affection of my patients to ground me. As I was making my rounds, checking on Buddy, who was now stable and wagging his tail weakly, I walked past the lab. My mind drifted back to the party, to that strange, bitter taste. As a veterinarian, I was trained to recognize the subtle signs of toxicity. Animals couldn't tell you what was wrong. You had to observe, to test, to deduce. The metallic tang in the champagne, it was familiar, but I couldn't place it. It tickled the edges of my memory, a half-recalled lecture from a toxicology class years ago. An idea, cold and terrifying, began to form in my mind. It was insane. It was the kind of thing you read about in thrillers, not something that happens in a suburban home on a sunny afternoon. But my parents' fury, their talk of me being a financial burden they needed to deal with. How far would they go? I needed to know. I drove back to my parents' house during my lunch break. I told myself I was just going to pick up the last of my textbooks from my old room. The house was empty. My father was at work, my mother was at one of her luncheons, and Leo was probably still asleep. I let myself in with my old key, my heart pounding against my ribs. The living room was spotless, all evidence of the party gone. I walked over to the wet bar in the corner. There were a few leftover bottles of champagne on the counter, waiting to be put away, and there, tucked behind the ice bucket, was the glass I had abandoned. It had been rinsed, but not thoroughly. A faint, filmy residue still clung to the bottom. My hands trembled as I wrapped the glass carefully in a clean paper towel from the kitchen and placed it in a sealable plastic bag for my vet kit. I also took one of the unopened champagne bottles from the same brand they had served. I needed a control sample. Back at the clinic, I waited until after hours, until everyone but Sarah had left. I trusted her completely. I found her finishing her notes in her office. "Sarah," I said, my voice shaking, "I need your help, and you have to promise you won't think I'm crazy." I laid out the story of the contract, the leech comments, and finally the glass. Her eyes widened with each detail. "Jordan, you don't really think," she started, her voice trailing off. "I don't know what to think," I admitted. "But I have to know. The lab we use for animal blood work also does toxicology screens. They won't ask questions if we send in a water sample for heavy metal and chemical analysis. We do it all the time for suspected environmental poisoning cases." Sarah nodded, her expression grim. "Okay, let's do it." We spent the next hour in the clinic's small lab. I carefully rinsed the inside of the tainted glass with a small amount of distilled water, collecting the runoff in a sterile sample vial. I labeled it Sample A, pond water. Then I opened the fresh bottle of champagne and poured a small amount into a second vial, labeling it Sample B, tap water control. It felt surreal, like a scene from a movie. This wasn't a sick pet. This was my life. We filled out the requisition forms with fabricated details about a farm dog that had been drinking from a suspicious pond near an old industrial site. It was a plausible story, one that wouldn't raise any alarms. We sent the samples off with the evening courier for rush processing. The next 48 hours were agonizing. I went through the motions at work, treating parakeets and puppies, all while a monstrous possibility grew in my mind. Every time I saw my parents' names flash on my phone, I would flinch, my stomach twisting into a knot of fear and disgust. I ignored their calls and texts, which quickly escalated from feigned concern to angry demands. On the third day, the lab report came back. Sarah and I huddled over the computer in my office, my hands so clammy I could barely control the mouse to open the PDF file. We scanned past the normal results for sample B, the control. Then we got to sample A. My breath caught in my throat. I read the words, but my brain refused to process them. Sarah sucked in a sharp breath beside me. The sample contained significant, undeniable traces of ethylene glycol. Antifreeze, it was a common, easily accessible poison. It had a sweet taste that could be masked in a sugary drink like champagne. In veterinary medicine, we saw its devastating effects all the time in animals who had lapped it up from a garage floor. It causes acute kidney failure. The initial symptoms are subtle, nausea, a slight dizziness, before the renal system shuts down completely over the next day or two. By the time the serious symptoms appear, it's often too late. It's a quiet, painful, and agonizing way to die, and afterward, it can often be misdiagnosed as a sudden, tragic medical event. An overworked, stressed-out new graduate suffering from sudden, catastrophic kidney failure. It would have been a tragedy. No one would have suspected a thing. The lab report was a death sentence they had tried to hand me in a champagne flute. They hadn't just wanted to trap me in debt. They had a life insurance policy on me. I was certain of it. I was worth more to them dead than alive. Their investment would pay out one way or another. The air left my lungs in a rush. I leaned back in my chair, the world tilting on its axis. The perfect, smiling faces of my parents at the party flashed in my mind, the toast, the special glass, drink up, sweetheart, you deserve it. It wasn't just a betrayal, it was an execution order, and I had come terrifyingly close to signing it myself. The anger came next, a white-hot wave that burned away the fear and the shock. They had tried to kill me, their own daughter, all for money. Jordan, Sarah whispered, her hand on my shoulder. What are you going to do? I looked at the lab report, the clinical, black on white confirmation of their monstrous act. My mind, trained to diagnose and create treatment plans, started working. They thought I was a leech, an asset to be liquidated. They had miscalculated. They had forgotten that I was a doctor. I knew all about poisons, and now I knew all about antidotes. I'm going to do what any good doctor would. I said, my voice deadly calm. I'm going to diagnose the disease, and then I'm going to cut it out. The lab report was the diagnosis. Now I needed to gather the evidence for the surgery. My first instinct was to go to the police, but I quickly dismissed it. It would be my word against the word of two respected members of the community. A trace amount of a chemical in a rinsed glass. Their high-priced lawyers would shred it, painting me as a vindictive, unstable daughter lashing out over a financial dispute. I needed more. I needed irrefutable proof. I needed to understand the why. The contract was one thing, but attempted murder was a whole other level of evil. My veterinarian training had taught me to be methodical. The first step in any complex case is to get a complete history. I needed the financial history of the Miller family. My father was a creature of habit and supreme arrogance. He believed he was smarter than everyone else, which made him sloppy. For years, he'd used a simple, shared family password for most of his non-banking account, our childhood street name followed by his birth year. It was a long shot, but I tried it on his personal email account. I was in, my hands shook as I scrolled through years of messages. It felt like a massive violation of privacy, but that ship had sailed the moment they mixed antifreeze into my champagne. I searched for keywords, insurance, policy, Jordan, debt, and then I found it. An email chain with an independent insurance broker dating back 6 months. My father had taken out a massive life insurance policy on me. The value, $5 million. The beneficiary wasn't my brother, Leo, or even split between my parents. The sole beneficiary was a trust, and the trustees were David and Susan Miller. The policy was designed to pay out upon accidental death or death by natural causes. Sudden, unexplained kidney failure in a healthy 28-year-old would have fit perfectly. The premiums were astronomical, and I found another email chain, this time with his bank manager. My father, the successful real estate developer, was drowning in debt. A series of risky commercial property ventures had gone sour. He had leveraged everything, and the banks were calling in their loans. He was facing financial ruin. He wasn't just maintaining his lifestyle, he was desperately trying to keep his entire empire from collapsing. $5 million would have been more than a lifeline. It would have been a jackpot. It would have solved all his problems. Next, I turned my attention to my mother. She was just as culpable. I found emails between her and my father discussing the Jordan problem. They talked about me in cold, detached terms. The asset is underperforming. The drain on our resources is no longer sustainable. We need a permanent solution before the end of the quarter. They were writing about their daughter as if I were a failing business they were planning to liquidate. My mother, it turned out, was the one who researched ethylene glycol. She had been reading articles on untraceable poisons and sudden medical emergencies. She was the architect of my death. Then there was Leo, my lazy, entitled brother. I found dozens of money transfers from my parents to his account, funding a lifestyle he did nothing to earn. But there was one email from my father to Leo, sent the day before my party. It was short and chilling. Tomorrow, all our problems are over. Your future will be secure. Just play your part. Leo wasn't just a bystander. He was an accomplice. He knew they were planning something, even if he didn't know the exact details. He was willing to let it happen to secure his inheritance. The final piece of the puzzle was the contract they had tried to force on me. It was a sham, a piece of theater. If I had signed it, they would have a motive to show the police if anything went wrong with their plan. The disgruntled daughter, angry about her debt. If I drank the champagne and died, they would have simply destroyed the contract, and no one would have been the wiser. It was their backup plan. I saved everything. I forwarded the emails to a new, anonymous account, downloaded them onto an encrypted thumb drive, and printed hard copies, which I stored in a safe deposit box Sarah helped me secure under a different name. The evidence was damning. It painted a picture of a family so consumed by greed and desperation that they were willing to murder their own child to maintain their social standing and financial security. They didn't see me as their daughter. I was a line item on a balance sheet, and I had moved from the asset column to the liability column. Their solution was simple accounting. Armed with this information, the fear I had felt began to transform. It crystallized into a cold, hard diamond of resolve. They had written me off. They thought I was weak, a soft-hearted animal lover who wouldn't fight back. They had mistaken my kindness for stupidity. They had created a monster of their own making. They wanted to liquidate their asset. Fine, I would liquidate them first, but I wouldn't use poison. I would use the one thing they valued more than anything, the weapon they themselves had handed me, their money. The police could give me justice, but that felt insufficient. I wanted vengeance. I wanted to strip them of everything they held dear. Their wealth, their reputation, their perfect, curated life, and leave them with nothing but the truth of what they were. The plan began to form in my mind, piece by meticulous piece. It was time to prepare the surgery. My parents, blinded by their own arrogance, believed their plan had simply been delayed. Their calls and texts continued, a toxic mix of feigned concern and thinly veiled threats about my financial obligations. I responded to one of my mother's texts with a simple, calculated message. You're right. I was emotional. I've had time to think. We need to talk about the contract. I'll come for dinner on Sunday. The bait was cast. Her reply was instant. We knew you'd see sense, darling. We'll have your favorite. The next few days were a blur of precise, careful preparation. My first move was to protect myself. I gave the encrypted thumb drive to Sarah, along with a sealed letter to be opened and delivered to the police and a major news outlet if anything happened to me. The letter contained everything: the lab report, the emails, the insurance policy, a full narrative of what they had tried to do. It was my own life insurance policy. My second move was to weaponize my father's desperation. I knew from his emails that his biggest financial crisis was tied to a specific commercial development project called Blackwood Plaza. The final financing was dependent on a zoning approval from the city council, and the vote was scheduled for the week after our family dinner. The project was so heavily leveraged that if the vote failed, it would trigger a cascade of defaults that would bankrupt him. His entire empire rested on this one vote. Through a friend of a friend who worked in the city planning department, I got my hands on the public proposal documents. I spent 2 nights poring over geological surveys, environmental impact reports, and architectural blueprints, the kind of tedious detail my father would outsource and never read himself, and I found it. A fatal flaw: the geological survey, conducted by a cut-rate firm he had hired, had conveniently overlooked evidence of a high water table and unstable soil on a portion of the property. Building a multi-story structure there without extensive and expensive foundational reinforcement would be criminally negligent. My third move was to set the stage. I called my father on Saturday afternoon, adopting a nervous, apologetic tone. "Dad," I began, "I'm really sorry about my behavior at the party. I was just overwhelmed. I want to make things right. I'll sign the contract tomorrow, but there's something else. I feel so guilty for being a burden. I want to help. I have a significant amount of money saved from my scholarships and part-time work over the years. It's not much, but I want to invest it with you, to show you I'm serious about being part of the family finances." There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the cogs of his greedy mind turning. A daughter, not only willing to sign away 30 years of her income, but also handing over her life savings. It was too good for him to resist. "How much, Jordan?" he asked, his voice sharp with interest. "About $75,000, I lied. The real number was closer to 20,000, but I needed the bait to be big enough. "That's my girl," he said, his voice oozing with false warmth. "Bring the bank statements tomorrow. We'll find the perfect place for it, a show of good faith." The final piece of my plan involved Leo. I knew my brother's weakness was his ego and his desperate need for our father's approval. I sent him a carefully worded text. "Hey Leo, I know things have been weird. I'm coming for dinner Sunday to sort it out. Dad mentioned he's bringing me into one of his deals. Sounded like a pretty big one. Maybe he's finally ready to trust us with the business." That was all it would take to ensure he was there, jealous and eager to prove he was the more worthy heir. Sunday arrived. I dressed carefully, not as a victim, but as the person they wanted me to be, compliant, successful, and a little naive. I brought a briefcase. Inside, there was a copy of the fraudulent contract they had drafted, my doctored bank statements showing the fictional savings, a high-quality audio recorder, and a copy of the damning geological survey for Blackwood Plaza. As I drove to their house, the house where I grew up, my heart wasn't pounding with fear. It was steady, calm. The scalpel was ready. The patient was prepped. The surgery was about to begin. They thought this dinner was about securing their financial future. They had no idea it was really their autopsy. I walked into the house, and the smell of roasted chicken, my supposed favorite, filled the air. It was a scene of domestic perfection. My mother, Susan, greeted me with a hug that felt like ice. My father, David, stood by the fireplace, a glass of whiskey in his hand, looking triumphant. Leo was on the couch, pretending to be engrossed in his phone but watching my every move. "Jordan, you look wonderful," and my mother chirped. "We're so glad you came to your senses." We sat down in the formal living room, the place for serious family discussions. My father took charge immediately. "All right, let's get the unpleasantness out of the way first," he said, sliding the thick contract across the coffee table. "Sign this, and we can put all that drama behind us." I picked up the pen, my hand steady. I clicked the top of it, turning on the audio recorder hidden inside. Then I placed the pen on the table next to the contract, but didn't sign. "First," I said, my voice even, "I want to talk about the investment." I opened my briefcase and pulled out the doctored bank statements, placing them on the table. $75,000. I want to invest it all in Blackwood Plaza. I've been reading about it. It sounds like a sure thing. My father's eyes lit up. This was going even better than he had imagined. An excellent choice, a flagship project. Your money will be in safe hands. I'm sure it will be, I said smoothly. But before I sign over my savings and 30 years of my future income, I have a few questions about another investment you made. I paused, letting the silence hang in the air. My mother shifted uncomfortably. "What are you talking about, dear?" I looked directly at my father. "I'm talking about my life insurance policy, the $5 million one you took out 6 months ago." The color drained from his face. My mother gasped, a tiny choked sound. Leo looked up from his phone, his jaw slack. That's just standard estate planning." My father stammered, his bravado cracking, a responsible thing for a parent to do. "Is it also standard estate planning to name yourselves the sole beneficiaries of a trust designed to pay out on accidental death?" I pressed, my voice like steel. "And is it standard practice to try and trigger that payout with a glass of champagne laced with ethylene glycol?" Dead silence. The air in the room became thick, unbreathable. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with terror. "That's a monstrous accusation." My father blustered, getting to his feet. "You're hysterical." "Am I?" I reached back into my briefcase and pulled out a folder. I opened it and laid the contents on the table one by one. The lab report from the clinic, showing the test results for Sample A, printed copies of their emails discussing the Jordan problem, and the permanent solution, a copy of the insurance policy. "You called me a leech," I said, my voice dangerously quiet, "but the real leeches are sitting in this room, drowning in debt from bad deals, so you decided to liquidate your asset. Your own daughter." I turned to Leo. "And you, just play your part, Dad told you. Did you know the pot was helping them murder your sister for your inheritance, so you could keep failing out of college on their dime?" Leo shrank back into the couch, looking like he was going to be sick. My mother started sobbing, not with remorse, but with the terror of being caught. David, do something. My father lunged for the papers, but I was faster. I swept them back into my briefcase. It's too late. The originals are in a safe deposit box. A detailed account of everything is in a letter with my lawyer, set to be delivered to the police and the press if I so much as trip on the sidewalk. You will not touch me ever again. He froze, his face a mottled purple of rage and fear. He was trapped. Now, here's what is going to happen. I said, taking command, this contract is void. I tore it in half, then in quarters. My investment is also off the table. Instead, you are going to give me something. I pulled out the last document, the geological survey for Blackwood Plaza. I found this, the real survey, the one your cut, rate firm ignored, unstable soil, high water table. If you build on that land without millions in foundational work, the structure will be unsafe. The city council's vote is on Tuesday. I have a meeting with the head of the zoning committee on Monday morning to present my findings, as a concerned citizen, of course. My father stared at the report, understanding dawning in his eyes. He was ruined, publicly, unless... I continued, you do exactly as I say. You have other assets, properties that aren't so heavily leveraged. You will liquidate them, all of them, and you will transfer $2 million to an account I have opened, not as repayment, as a severance package, for severing myself from this toxic, poisonous family. You can't, he snarled. That would ruin us. No, I corrected him. You ruined you. I'm just collecting the bill. You have until Monday at 9 a.m. to make the transfer. If the money is not in the account, the zoning committee gets a new favorite bedtime story. After that, you will never contact me again. You will tell your friends I moved away for a prestigious research opportunity. You will maintain the picture. Perfect lie, because it's all you'll have left. I stood up, briefcase in hand. You tried to poison me for money, so I'm taking your money and giving you the poison of living with the consequences, knowing your own daughter outplayed you at every turn. Enjoy your chicken. I walked out of the house without looking back, leaving the wreckage of their lives scattered on the coffee table behind me. The surgery was complete. The cancer was excised. The hours between Sunday night and Monday morning were the longest of my life. I stayed at Sarah's apartment, my phone on the table in front of me. I didn't know if he would do it. Pride was a powerful poison, and my father had been mainlining it his entire life. Would he let his empire crumble out of pure spite? At 8:52 a.m., my phone buzzed with a notification from my bank. A wire transfer, $2 million. Relief washed over me, so potent it almost brought me to my knees. It wasn't about the money, it was about the victory. He had folded. I had one. I made the call to cancel my meeting with the zoning committee. I didn't need to ruin him publicly. That had just been the leverage. The beauty of my revenge was that it was silent. He, my mother, and my brother would have to live every day knowing what they had done, and knowing that I held the power to destroy them at any moment. They would be trapped in their gilded cage, forever looking over their shoulders. Their real punishment wasn't bankruptcy. It was a life sentence of fear. The first thing I did with the money was pay off my student loans and the portion of my tuition that I had felt a moral obligation to repay to the universe. The rest I put into a trust managed by a professional. It wasn't for a lavish lifestyle. It was for freedom, the freedom to never again be dependent on anyone, the freedom to build a life on my own terms. I quit my job at the local clinic, giving Marcus my heartfelt thanks for his mentorship. With a portion of the funds, I started my own animal rescue foundation, a place for the creatures no one else wanted, the sick, the abandoned, the abused. It was my way of turning the ugliest chapter of my life into something beautiful. My work became my life, and the unconditional love of the animals I saved helped to heal the parts of me my family had tried to break. Sarah became the head veterinarian at my foundation. We built it together, a sanctuary born from betrayal. She was the only family I needed. I never saw or spoke to my parents or brother again. Through the grapevine of old family acquaintances, I heard bits and pieces. My father had to sell the big house and most of his commercial properties to stay afloat after the transfer. They downsized significantly. My mother's social life withered. The strain of keeping up appearances with diminished funds was too much for her. Leo, cut off from the endless stream of cash, apparently had to get a real job. Their punishment was exactly what I had designed, a quiet, slow decay. They were left with the husk of their former lives, haunted by the knowledge that their own daughter held the key to their complete annihilation. They had tried to take my life for $5 million. In the end, they paid $2 million just to keep their secrets. It was a terrible bargain, and they would be paying the interest on it for the rest of their lives. Sometimes, when I'm sitting in my office late at night, the soft sound of a sleeping dog in the recovery kennel next door, I think about that champagne glass. I think about how close I came to not being here. The chill of that thought never completely goes away, but it's not followed by fear anymore. It's followed by a quiet, fierce pride. They thought I was a liability they could just write off. They failed to account for one thing: I am a survivor. I cut the poison out of my life, and in doing so, I finally found the antidote.